Today we're going to look at this important part of history, the original professional Canon EOS-1. We will also go to 3 unnamed exotic locations for tests with 2 different film types. EOS stands for Electro Optical System, or alternatively, Eos, the goddess of dawn in Greek mythology. The dawn of a new era for Canon, new levels of automation, and a new set of lenses using the electronic EF lens mount. This is the camera range that gave Nikon a real fright and considerably raised the bar for Canon and all of its competitors who needed to catch up. The year is 1989.
Live from downtown Tokyo, scenes of the final farewell to Emperor Hirohito.
Canon introduced its flagship EOS-1 this way. With the distinction of being Canon's top-of-the-line AF SLR, the EOS-1 represents the sum total of considerable efforts to design a camera that meets the requirements of the most demanding professional photographers. Despite the name EOS-1, it was not the first EOS. The first one was EOS 650 in 1987. It became commonplace in some Japanese brands that the more numbers you have after the letters, the lower the product status from professional to entry level. Number 1 is never wasted, so when Canon releases EOS-1, it means this is the best we've got now. EOS-1 was the successor to Canon's highly regarded F1 and later new F1, and based on the design of Canon T90 designed by Luigi Colani.
I invented Japanese design altogether. Every good designer in the world, like Pininfarina or Giugiaro, had one special edition of this car styling volume. Colani had 4.
Its successor 5 years later, in 1984, was EOS-1N. It offered additional focusing points and increased predictive focus tracking for moving objects. Later still, in the year 2000, the last film EOS camera, the EOS-1V, came until it was discontinued in 2018. It introduced 45-point autofocus and 9 frames per second, beating Nikon F5 and without using the fixed mirror technique. This camera was the last professional film camera by Canon after almost 80 years of film camera production. Subsequent professional EOS cameras were digital and largely based on EOS-1V, starting with the flagship EOS-1D in 2001 and EOS-1DS with a full-frame 35mm sensor in 2002. These firmly established Canon's technological and commercial success for the next 2 decades, which is a story for another day. I'll demonstrate this camera in the usual order of operation, and for now I assume you've loaded a battery. The main switch on the back has 3 positions. L means off, turn off to prevent accidental shutter release and minimize battery drain. A is the on position, but without any sound. The sound symbol here is also the on position, but with audible sound for autofocus lock. EOS cameras were designed for the new range of Canon EF lenses. These have both an AF setting for autofocus and M for manual focus. This rubber eye cup can be removed by slightly pressing the middle, then slide it up. Behind it, you'll find a dioptric adjustment dial which goes from -3 to +1. Start with this the first time. This is often a lifesaver. Open this useful palm door, borrowed from the earlier Canon T90, and press the white rescue button labeled as clear. The purpose of that button is clear. Turn all the settings to their defaults. Here's a large LCD display panel for all settings. It now seems obvious on all cameras, but for decades before EOS-1, it was not the method of showing your settings and choices. The knobs and buttons told you individually what their settings were. It was a huge innovation that someone thought you don't need multiple dials and displays. You only need one dial, one display, and some buttons to choose what you want. The credit goes to Minolta for their Maxim cameras, but when Canon through EOS-1 and Nikon through F5 put the professional stamp of approval on this method, it was guaranteed to be the user interface of choice for the next 3 decades. This is the selection of PASM shooting mode. This is the shutter speed from 30 seconds to 1/8,000th of a second. This is the aperture showing the range from your lens. This is the autofocus mode. This is the film winding mode. This is the light metering mode. And this scale at the bottom shows the exposure compensation depending on PASM mode. Right now, the display shows the default settings after pressing that white clear button. In the dark, you can press this button and it lights up for 6 seconds. Press this security lock and slide this latch down. With practice, you can do both at the same time with your thumb. Put the film cartridge in the left chamber and stretch the film leader to the other side until it reaches the orange mark. Make sure the film is flat, close the back cover. The film will auto-advance to number 1, ready to shoot. If the bars blink, it means the film is not loaded correctly. Open the back and load again. Here's the shutter button with a half press function. The focusing system is through the lens or TTL phase detection. It has an impressive operational range according to the lighting condition, which is 4 times more sensitive than the first EOS 650. Half press to activate autofocus over your main subject. Autofocus is achieved when the AF light comes on in the viewfinder. You can fully press to take a picture. If for some reason autofocus is not possible, the AF light blinks and shutter will not activate even if you fully press it. You can also activate the AF with the AE lock button here if you set the camera for it using the custom function control number 4. EOS-1 uses a single 6V 2CR5 lithium battery like this. Turn the screw at the bottom of the grip with a coin, the old-fashioned way. Fortunately, the screw itself does not come off, so it doesn't get lost. Load the battery upside down with the label facing out. Then put the grip back into place and tighten the screw. To check the battery power, turn the main switch to A or sound symbol, open the palm door and press the battery button here. The LCD display goes into the BC or battery check mode and shows the power as a number of bars. Normally, you would not bother with the film speed setting as the camera will read the DX coding of the film cartridge. This covers ISO 25 to ISO 5000. But you can set the film speed manually by pressing the AF and metering buttons at the same time while turning the main dial. Display will scroll through the film speeds and you stop where you want. Normally, film rewind starts automatically when the roll reaches the end. If you want to activate rewind manually, press rewind button here. You can do it anytime including mid-roll. Careful, this button does not have a security lock, so don't press it just to find out what it does. Oops. There's another custom setting that leaves a little film leader out of the cartridge after rewind. This is very useful if you want to develop the film yourself, as I demonstrated in this video. You can combine these two features, which will give you the option to change the film in mid-roll. Let's say you shoot up to frame 20 on ISO 160 film. Then in late afternoon, you want to switch to ISO 400. Press the manual rewind, take out the partially used cartridge, which has a little leader out. Put in a new film and shoot. Another day, you want to use the rest of that first film. Okay, load it as normal. Put on the lens cap, put the focus mode on AI servo or switch the lens to the manual focus mode. This means it'll shoot even without achieving focus and when the cap is on. Shoot 20 frames plus 1 extra as a safety margin. Then continue shooting as normal. Since the film loading is automatic, every time you load the film, the location of the first shot is almost exactly in the same place, and therefore the location of shot 20 will be in the same place also. Behind the palm door, there is a dedicated drive button. Press and turn the main dial. The choices are S for single film advance, C for continuous advance at 2.5 frames per second. CL will shoot at 3 frames per second. CH means continuous high, which shoots at 5.5 frames per second. All of these speeds are the one-shot autofocus mode. In the AI servo autofocus mode, they all become half a second to 1 second slower. At the time, cameras were competing for the highest speed. For example, Canon achieved 10 frames per second with EOS-1N RS using a fixed semi-transparent mirror, not a moving mirror. Another setting under the drive button is self-timer. You have a choice of 2 seconds and 10 seconds. 2 seconds is basically a replacement for cable release to remove the camera shake or mirror vibration. 10 seconds is obviously to get yourself in the picture. Remember to reset the drive mode. Press the AF button and rotate the main dial to select one of the autofocus modes. In the one-shot mode, when focus is achieved, both focus and exposure are locked and the camera will not hunt anymore. One shot will let you shoot only if focus is locked successfully, so it won't shoot with the cap on. If this annoys you, there is a custom setting F4 to set the AE lock button for autofocus. Then you can shoot regardless of the focus condition. AI Servo Mode stands for Artificial Intelligence Servo Automatic Focusing. In this mode, the camera will continuously refocus as you chase a subject. The AI part means during the movement of a runner or a bird in flight, it will predict the focus point of the object ahead of time. It will shoot at any time you press the shutter, regardless of successful focus. There will be no beeper confirmation.
What a champion!
To set the manual mode, you have to move the switch on the lens from AF to M. The camera body will detect it and show it as M focus. For USM or ultrasonic motor lenses, this switching step is not required. When you focus manually, the camera will still help you with the focus light as long as you half press the shutter button. There are several metering modes. Press the metering mode button and turn the dial to select one. Here are the choices. Evaluative metering mode, which is similar to matrix metering, measures the light in 6 different zones of the frame with emphasis over the center zone. This mode is meant for most shooting conditions. In the one-shot focus mode, exposure is set at the time of shutter half press, but in AI Servo mode, the exposure is set at the time of shutter release. Center weight light metering mode is an alternative to evaluative metering mode. To choose it, you must activate custom function F8. It means you cannot choose between the two by the main dial. The partial metering mode measures light of the center zone or approximately 5.8% of the frame or 8 mm circle. This circle is larger than what you would call spot metering. Exposure is set at the time of shutter release. The actual spot metering mode measures a circle of 2.3% of the frame or 5 mm circle. Exposure is set at the time of shutter release. In any of the metering modes, you can lock the exposure before the shutter release. For that, press the AE lock button. The AE lock asterisk will show in the viewfinder. For example, with the shutter half press, you can first lock the focus on the most important part of your subject, which may not be the center. Then point at something that represents the best balance of light and shade that you want for the metering and press the AE lock button. Then move again and find the best composition and take the shot. This is total control, plus all the automation tools at your fingertips. The camera gives you all the power, but you remain the decision maker. Perfect. This camera has all the PASM modes, plus more, but sometimes under different names. P for Program Auto Exposure means both aperture and shutter are automatically set by the camera. In the program mode, you can change the balance of shutter speed and aperture whilst keeping the amount of light the same. This is called program shift. Just turn the dial and the camera will scroll through all the combinations which are correct. The only difference is depth of field. For aperture priority, you select AV on the display panel. AV? Neither the camera nor the manual will tell you what AV is. Why not AP or just A? In case you're wondering, AV means aperture value and sounds more professional, okay? Turn the main dial to set the aperture first in 1/3 steps. The camera will then set the shutter speed automatically. The next mode is shutter priority. Let me guess, this one is called SP or S? Nope. This one is called TV, which means time value, but the manual calls it shutter priority. Turn the main dial to set the shutter speed in 1/3 stops and the camera will set the aperture. Depth of field automatic exposure. Surely this one is labeled as DOF, right? Nope. This one is called DEP. Just get used to it. This is actually an innovative mode where the camera places everything between two user set points on the foreground and background in focus. This is achieved by manipulating first the aperture and then the shutter. The narrower the aperture, the greater the depth of field. To use this mode, point at the foreground and half press the shutter release. Then point at the background that you want to be in focus and half press the shutter again. Recompose somewhere between these two and fully press the shutter release. Now for the next shot, you need to clear these autofocus points. For that, you press the shooting mode selector once more. This feature is interesting, but I think there are too many steps involved. It's easier to just use aperture priority mode and do the thinking yourself. Manual exposure. In this mode, the main dial sets the shutter speed. That means we need another dial, right? The second dial is called the quick control dial on the back. Make sure this switch is set to 1, which means it activates the dial. Even though you're in control of the shutter and aperture, the camera still shows you the correct exposure in the viewfinder on the right, so you can either follow it or ignore it. The bulb mode, which has nothing to do with the light bulb, is for very long exposures. The time will be shown on the main display panel as some bars representing 30 seconds each, plus some additional seconds in the little window. So this means 61 seconds, and this means 96 seconds. As user interface design goes, this one is not the best. In the auto exposure modes, turn the quick control dial switch on, then turn it to choose exposure compensation from -3 to +3 in 1/3 stops. You need to do this within 6 seconds of the half press of a shutter button. There's another way you can do this, which may even be more convenient. Press the dedicated exposure compensation button here and turn the main dial. Exposure bracketing is possible by pressing these two buttons together in the palm door. The range is -3 to +3 in 1/3 step increments. Considering the film prices today, it is highly unlikely that you will waste shots on exposure bracketing. You can read the manual for that. If you really want in-camera multiple exposure, press the mode and metering buttons together. ME will come up in the display panel. Turn the main dial and select the number of shots you want from 2 to 9. Seriously? You can then shoot on the same frame without advancing the film. I recommend do the same thing in Photoshop after taking normal shots. It's much easier and much more creative. In EOS-1, the viewfinder is not modular but fixed. It has a hot shoe on top for a range of Canon speedlights. The hot shoe provides flash sync at speeds from 30 seconds to 1/250th of a second. If necessary, flash can also be connected by the cable via the PC socket here. Looking inside, we see a full information viewfinder, nice and clear. At the bottom we have most of the information, and on the right we have the electronic version of a needle for some shooting modes. The letter M indicates that you're in the manual exposure mode. The asterisk indicates that automatic exposure or AE lock or AEB is activated. This is the flash ready symbol, and this is the focus indicator. In the center, you see the rectangle, which is your focus zone, then two circles showing the spot focusing options. On the right, we have the exposure scale, which can be used in the manual mode or for applying exposure compensation. There's an exposure value indicator that goes up and down. Up means overexposure, down means underexposure, center means the correct exposure as recommended by the camera. At the bottom of the scale, we see the frame counter that counts backward. It shows the frames remaining. Press this button, turn the lens left, and remove. You cannot use the old FD lenses. You need the later EF lenses. This is a dedicated button for depth of field preview. Press it and you will see the aperture narrowed to your current setting, showing the true depth of field that is going to be captured. The shutter in EOS-1 is an electronically controlled vertical travel metal focal plane shutter. I mentioned a few times that you can change some of the default functions using custom controls. This feature is very similar to Nikon F5, which I described in this video. There are 8 custom functions that you can program by pressing CF button in the palm door. Initially, the control number F1 or function 1 and value 0 appears. You turn the main dial for one of the numbers such as F3. Then to change the value from 1 to 0 or 0 to 1, press the custom function button again. If you make a mess of the whole thing and want to clear all of them, press that white rescue button, the one that's called clear. One of the most important accessories for a professional camera such as this one is the Power Drive Booster E1. This increases the maximum winding speed to 5.5 frames per second using 8 AA batteries. There is a command back E1, which is a data back. There are 7 focusing screens which can be changed from inside the bayonet mount, not by removing the finder. handling of the camera and the ergonomics are excellent, second to none. No complaints at all. It's heavy in a nice way at 890 grams including the batteries. It feels substantial and serious. Everything is in the right place. Initially, the mid-gray color and its surface texture imply that it may be a little plasticky or flimsy, but as soon as you pick it up and look at it closely, you realize it's something else. It means business. It's not as strong and heavy as F5, but then what is? Canon EOS-1 was a huge leap after Canon F1 and new F1. It was more than a decade in the making. It instantly indicated the end of history for all other Canon SLRs, the ED lenses that came before it, and all the accessories. It managed to switch many loyal Nikon professionals to the Canon camp, especially those in the press and sports photography that were wooed by the fast autofocus and easy user interface. By the time of the 1992 Olympic Games in Barcelona, the vast majority of the photographers were using EOS-1 rather than Nikon F3 or F4. Canon, more than any other manufacturer, forced the entire professional photography industry to embrace rather than resist the electronics and automation in cameras. This also prepared Canon for the fast emerging digital era. After EOS-1, Canon iterated fast and improved the details. Many other EOS cameras followed for enthusiasts and beginners, with various degrees of simplification or improvement. The later professional models, such as EOS-1N, are technically superior, but one more feature is not so significant now. Holding this original EOS-1 is like holding the original Canon F1, a significant piece of history that remains highly functional and reliable today. That is why it's here. We like the first and last generation of each camera for their historic value and the contribution to the technology heritage. At the time, everyone was comparing EOS-1 with Nikon F4. Nikon F4 was 30% more expensive than Canon EOS-1. In 1990, there was a review in Peterson's Photographic looking at EOS-1 versus Nikon F4. Its conclusions seem to be spot on. The longtime pro will probably prefer the F4's more traditional control. Other photographers may prefer EOS-1's control dial and buttons. It took our 20-year-plus veteran photographers a little longer to get used to EOS-1 than F4, while our 1980s photographer actually felt at home with EOS-1 more quickly than the F4. A better comparison would be between Canon EOS-1N or EOS-1V and Nikon F5. Now that would be very interesting and reserved for another day. Let's do a quick visual comparison with the most relevant cameras. Here's Canon's first professional SLR, the F1, against EOS-1. Here's the professional Pentax LX. Here's the first professional autofocus camera, Minolta 9000 AF, or Maxim 9000. Here's EOS-1's contemporary, Nikon's first autofocus professional camera, the F4. Here's a more direct comparison, Nikon F5 versus EOS-1. Here's the nearest Leica, the R8, 7 years later, and not autofocus. In conclusion, if you are already a Canon fan, or if you are rediscovering the film camera world, this should be on your shopping shortlist for consideration. If you want to consider any of the later models of EOS-1 film camera, a simplified comparison table is here. Canon EOS-1 cameras are now amazingly affordable for what you get. If you want versatility, competent execution, familiar user interface, and a ton of lenses at affordable prices, don't hesitate to pick up one of these. For added comfort, Canon is a company that is still around and thriving. It is hovering between number 1 and 2 in cameras. They're also top of the class in many other products. They're not going to disappear on us anytime soon. So this is a safe choice from a solid brand. That's it for today. Come back again for more. Subscribe means thank you.